When war ends, the world expects silence, a gentle kind of peace, a calm return to normal life, as if the battlefield can be left behind like a discarded uniform. But for many soldiers, the end of war is the beginning of an entirely new struggle, one that unfolds quietly, far from the cameras and the cheering crowds. It is a struggle no one prepares them for, a battle without maps or mission briefings. It is the fight to rebuild a life that no longer fits, to search for pieces of themselves they thought they lost somewhere between dust, danger, and duty. The headlines speak of victory, of courage, of heroes returning home. What they do not speak of is the weight that follows those heroes back into the world they once called familiar. This phase begins in the silence after the noise. It begins the moment the boots hit the ground, the moment families smile through tears and soldiers hold those they love, while a different memory plays quietly behind their eyes. Sergeant Michael Reeves felt this silence the day he stepped off the aircraft and into the arms of his wife, Emma. She held their little daughter close, waving with a smile that trembled with relief. To her, this moment was the end of fear. To him, it was the beginning of a new uncertainty. His heart wanted to be present, but his mind flickered between two worlds, the one in front of him and the one he left behind in dust and heat and tension. Michael tried to smile, tried to breathe, tried to let peace in, but he was still carrying the battlefield inside him. Across the country, Private Alicia Grant lay awake in a quiet bedroom illuminated only by the soft glow of a street lamp outside. It had been 11 days since she came home. 11 days of friends visiting, family embracing her, people telling her how proud they were, how glad they felt to see her safe. 11 days of trying to answer questions with a smile she didn't feel. 11 nights of sleep disrupted by memories she desperately wanted to forget. Her mother believed Alicia just needed rest. Her brother thought she'd adapt soon. But Alicia didn't lack rest. She lacked peace. The battlefield had followed her home, not in the form of sounds or explosions, but in flashes, moments too sharp to process, shadows that lingered in the corners of her mind. She replayed the voice of a young soldier calling for his brother. She remembered the blood on her hands. She remembered the helplessness. These memories were stitched too deeply into her, refusing to dissolve into the past. Alicia closed her eyes, pressed her hands against her face, and exhaled shakily. She didn't know how to explain to anyone that she wasn't just tired, she was lost. While these two soldiers struggled quietly, others across the country faced hidden battles of their own. Corporal James Mendoza had returned to his old construction job. On paper, it was the perfect match. Familiar, stable, something he used to enjoy before he deployed. But the noises, the clanging, the vibrations, the metallic hum of tools sent his nervous system into a storm of panic. Every sudden sound reminded him of alerts, of danger, of the possibility of everything going wrong at any second. His co-workers teased him for being jumpy, unaware that every loud vibration echoed like a distant explosion in his mind. James kept these thoughts to himself, swallowing down anxiety between shaky breaths. He pushed through the workday silently, trying to convince himself he was fine. trying to pretend the war didn't follow him home, trying to avoid burdening others with feelings he didn't know how to explain. Because how does one describe a battle no one else can see? Those outside the military rarely understand that the transition home is not a switch that flips. It's a slow, uneven process. Soldiers return to a world that feels familiar yet strange, a world that moved on while they were frozen in moments of survival. Some struggle with sleep. Some struggle with noise. Some struggle with sudden bursts of emotions they can't control. Some struggle with feeling nothing at all. But all of them, in their own ways, are trying. Healing often begins with something small, something ordinary, something that would seem insignificant to others. For Michael, it happened on a simple evening walk. His daughter tugged at his hand, eager to go to the park. He hesitated at first, the unpredictability of crowds, the sudden noises, the fear that something might trigger a memory he wasn't ready to relive. But her tiny hand in his felt like an anchor, a reminder of the life he wanted to reclaim, a reminder that he wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for moments like this. So he walked, one slow step at a time. He flinched at barking dogs. He tightened his grip when a car backfired down the street. But he kept walking beside his daughter, listening to her laugh, watching her skip, feeling a piece of himself thaw beneath her innocence. For Alicia, healing began with a letter she forgot she had written, a letter tucked inside her old uniform pocket. Her own handwriting stared back at her with words she wrote before deployment, words filled with fear, hope, and determination. "Don't forget who you were before the war," the letter said. "You're still that person. The world just looks different now." She held the paper to her chest and let the tears come, not the tears of pain, but the tears of release. That letter reminded her that the person she was before still existed somewhere inside her, even if she felt buried beneath the memories. James's healing began with a quiet conversation. An older co-worker who had served in a previous war noticed James's trembling hands and distant eyes. He approached him not with judgment, but with understanding. He said gently, "You don't have to carry all of this alone. You're not the first to feel it, and you won't be the last. But you don't have to pretend, not here." Those words cracked something open inside James. A shield he didn't realize he had been holding onto finally softened. Healing doesn't always happen through medication or therapy, though both can help. Sometimes healing happens through connection, through acceptance, through the simple recognition that someone understands. Across the country, small victories like these quietly unfolded. A soldier attended a support meeting for the first time. Another returned to an old hobby. Another found purpose in mentoring new service members. Another simply learned to sit outside without feeling the urge to scan the environment for danger. These moments rarely made headlines. They rarely looked heroic. But they were monumental steps toward rebuilding lives once fractured by conflict. Healing is not the absence of pain. Healing is allowing hope to exist even when pain still lingers. Healing is believing in tomorrow, even when yesterday still hurts. Healing is choosing every day to take one more step forward. As weeks passed, something began to shift for each of them. Michael slept through the night more often. He laughed with his wife without feeling guilt. He learned to breathe slowly through the sudden spikes of panic, grounding himself in the present. Alicia began attending an art class. She painted scenes of peace, not the world as she saw it, but the world she wanted to return to. Through every brushstroke, she reclaimed a part of herself she thought she had lost. James started volunteering at a local veteran center. Helping others helped him. It reminded him that he still had purpose, still had strength, still had something to offer. These were not grand accomplishments, but they were real. They were honest. They were the beginnings of rebuilding lives brick by brick, breath by breath, moment by moment. Because beyond every battlefield, there is a life waiting to be rebuilt. And beyond every scar, there is a story waiting to rise again. This is the beginning of their transformation. This is the first phase of healing, the first step toward rediscovering themselves, the first breath of hope after the long, suffocating silence of war. Phase 1 ends here. Phase 2 will continue deepening their emotional journey, expanding their struggles, relationships, and recovery arcs. The first light of dawn spilled across the valley as William stepped out of his barracks tent, the cool air carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. He had barely slept. His thoughts had wandered all night back to everything he had left behind and everything he was slowly losing inside himself. War had a way of eating pieces of a man, quietly, without permission, and William felt himself growing hollow day by day. But this morning was different, because today he had a letter. A small folded paper tucked carefully inside his coat pocket, a letter from Alara. He held it like a fragile treasure, feeling the warmth of her words even before reading them again. She had written about their field, the one behind her father's house, where the tall grass swayed like ocean waves. She wrote about the winter apples that were beginning to ripen and the way the evenings now felt colder without him. Her words were soft, gentle, and carried a kind of hope that he clung to like a lifeline. As he stood alone in the soft sunrise glow, he let himself imagine her standing there too, smiling the way she used to. He pictured her hands brushing against his cheek, telling him he wasn't alone, that she was still waiting, still believing. But reality was harsh. A horn sounded from across the encampment, short, sharp, commanding. The day's march was about to begin. William inhaled deeply, folded Alara's letter carefully, and tucked it back into his pocket. Her words were the only shield he had that didn't weigh him down. He joined his unit as they assembled. The sound of boots on frozen soil echoed through the clearing. Faces around him looked exhausted, eyes sunken, but they all carried the same silent determination. The war was far from over, and their orders today were dangerous. They would be advancing into contested woodland to reinforce an outpost that had gone silent 2 nights earlier. The path to that outpost had gained a heavy reputation: ambushes, disappearances, scouts lost without a trace. But orders were orders. As they began their slow advance, the forest swallowed them in thick silence. The trees towered overhead, forming a cathedral of shadows and flickering light. Every step made William more aware of the weight of his rifle, the stiffness in his shoulders, and the familiar ache of fear sitting at the base of his stomach. But deeper than the fear was something else, a drive fueled by Alara. He wanted to live long enough to hold her again, long enough to tell her everything he never had the courage to say. Hours passed. The forest felt endless. Suddenly, the soldier in front of him lifted a fist. Everyone froze. Not a sound, not a bird, not even the wind. Then a crack. A single, snapped twig somewhere ahead. William's breath caught in his throat. His hand tightened on his rifle. The forest felt like it was breathing around them, watching them. Another crack. Then the world exploded. Arrows rained from the trees, slicing through the air with deadly precision. The unit scattered for cover. Shouts filled the forest, men diving behind fallen logs, smoke and panic rising together. William rolled behind a tree and pressed his back against the bark, trying to steady his breathing. His heart pounded so violently he could feel it in his throat. He fired toward the shifting shadows in the distance, never sure if he hit anything. The forest blurred into chaos, running shapes, shouts for medics, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Minutes stretched like hours. But slowly the attacks faded. The shadows disappeared into the woods. The forest fell silent once again. Too silent. Their unit was reduced. The ground was littered with abandoned gear, shattered arrows, and the cold stillness of men who would never rise again. William's hands shook as he reloaded. He swallowed hard, feeling that familiar tightening in his chest. Every life lost chipped away at something inside him, but this one, this place, this silence felt heavier. They pushed forward cautiously until they reached the outpost. What they found drained the last bit of warmth from William's bones. The outpost had been overrun, destroyed, empty. Ashes still smouldered in the fire pit. Equipment lay scattered as if dropped mid-run. A coat hung on a post, torn and burned at the edges. Not a single soldier remained. The captain stared at the ruins with clenched fists and wet eyes. He didn't need to say it. Everyone felt it, the dread, the helplessness, the crushing reality of war's cruelty. William walked slowly through the ruined camp, scanning for anything, any sign someone survived. He found a broken lantern, a boot, a journal scorched beyond reading. Then something glinted in the dirt. A necklace. He recognized the emblem one worn by Private Lawson, a young soldier barely old enough to shave. He always talked about his mother's cooking, about wanting to go home and build a small house by the river. William knelt and picked up the necklace, holding it in his palm. Lawson was gone. Just like that, another life swallowed by war. William closed his eyes, took a shaking breath, and slipped the necklace into his pocket. He would make sure it reached Lawson's family, if he made it out alive. The captain gave the order to fortify the ruins and prepare for nightfall. They would camp here despite the danger. There was no other choice. As darkness fell, the men gathered around a small, controlled fire. The flames flickered against their tired faces. Some whispered prayers. Others stared blankly into the fire, lost in memories they weren't ready to share. William sat apart from the others, leaning against a broken wall. He took out Alara's letter and opened it again. The paper was slightly wrinkled now, the edges worn from being held too tightly, but her words still glowed softly in the firelight. Come home to me, no matter how long it takes. I'll be waiting. He felt tears sting his eyes, quiet, unexpected. He wiped them quickly, afraid someone might notice. Soldiers weren't supposed to break. They weren't allowed the luxury of softness. But love didn't follow war's rules. As he read the letter again, he felt something steady inside him. Not strength exactly, but a reason, a direction. He wasn't fighting just because he was ordered to. He was fighting because someone loved him enough to wait. The night grew colder. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. William tucked the letter away and looked at the stars peeking through the dark canopy. He wondered if Alara was looking at the same sky. He wondered if she had any idea how much her words were keeping him alive. He sighed deeply and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be another day of marching, scouting, surviving. Another day of trying to hold on to the pieces of himself that war hadn't taken yet. But tonight, he had her memory, her love, her promise. He let those thoughts wrap around him like a blanket as he drifted into an uneasy sleep, one filled with half-formed dreams of home, soft hands, and warm light cutting through endless darkness. And somewhere deep in his heart, a small flame stayed alive. Because love, even in war, was stronger than fear. When the world talks about war, it often speaks in the language of destruction numbers, dates, casualty counts, battles won or lost. But when you listen closely to the people who lived through it, you discover that war has another language, a quieter one. A language written not in smoke and fire, but in the steady heartbeat of human beings who refuse to break, even when everything around them has fallen apart. This phase of the story begins in the silent moments after conflict, the hours when the guns are quiet but the mind is loud. It begins with a man sitting alone on a wooden bench outside a temporary shelter, his hands trembling slightly as he stares at the ground. His name doesn't matter for now, because his story could belong to thousands. He has survived the battlefield, but now he faces the hardest battlefield of all, the one inside himself. Some footage shows men like him walking slowly across an open field, their shadows long and tired. Others show women carrying bundles of clothes, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. And somewhere in those moving images, the dust rising, the wind shifting, you see something powerful. They keep walking, they keep trying, they keep choosing life, even when life feels unfamiliar. This is where the human spirit begins its quiet rebellion against despair. For some, it starts with the smallest decision, standing up in the morning, washing their face, taking a single step forward. Survivors of war often say that healing doesn't begin with a grand moment of clarity. It begins with breathing again, eating again, trusting again. Each day adds a thin layer of strength, almost invisible at first, but growing with time like sunlight through a cracked window. There is a young soldier in this story, barely 24, with deep lines under his eyes that weren't there before deployment. When he came home, his mother hugged him for a long time. But even in her arms, He felt like he was still somewhere else. He didn't know how to explain the emptiness inside him, so he stayed quiet. Days passed like blurred photographs. Nights felt even heavier. One evening, he walked outside just before sunset. The sky was soft and golden, the kind of light that usually makes everything look gentle. But he didn't feel gentle at all. He felt broken in ways he didn't have words for. Then, somewhere behind him, he heard a soft sound, someone laughing. A neighbor's child chasing a ball across the yard. The boy ran, fell, then burst into laughter again. And, for the first time in weeks, the soldier smiled. Just a little, but enough for something inside him to shift. Healing had found its first opening. That is how the human spirit works, quietly, unexpectedly, in the moments we least expect. A small gesture, a familiar smell, a memory of who we were before everything changed. Hope is rarely loud. It whispers, nudges, and waits patiently for us to notice. Across the world, survivors begin rebuilding their identity piece by piece. Some find comfort in routine, waking up early, cleaning their space, learning a new skill. Some find healing in helping others, because helping someone else feel whole can often fill the empty parts within themselves. Communities rise again through these small, steady acts. One woman in this story used to be a teacher before the conflict scattered her village. After the war, she returned to find her school abandoned, broken windows, dust-covered desks, and silence where children's voices once echoed. She stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sight. But instead of turning away, she took a deep breath, walked inside, and began picking up fallen books one by one. The next day, she cleaned the chalkboard. The day after that, she repaired 2 desks, and within a month, 4 children were sitting in front of her again, waiting to learn. No government told her to return. No organization funded her work. She simply remembered who she was before war tried to rewrite her life, and she chose to reclaim that identity. That is the strength of the human spirit. It remembers even when everything else is forgotten. Survivors also rebuild through connections by reaching out, even when trust feels fragile. Trauma tells people to isolate, but healing invites them to reconnect. Neighbors begin sharing meals again. Families gather around old photographs. Groups form to support one another through grief and recovery. There is a scene in this part of the story where people sit around a small fire at night. Their faces glow softly in the orange light. And for a moment, you can't tell who is wounded, who is grieving, who is struggling. You just see human beings breathing the same air, sharing the same warmth. Someone tells a story. Someone else laughs. A child falls asleep on their mother's lap. And in that quiet night, the world feels whole again. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to live with the memories without letting them control every breath. Survivors learn to turn their scars into stories, their pain into purpose. Some become counselors, helping others through similar struggles. Some become advocates for peace. Others simply choose to be present for their families in ways they couldn't before. One former medic, haunted for years by the lives he couldn't save, eventually found a new calling in training young volunteers in first aid and emergency care. Maybe I couldn't save everyone, he says, but I can help others save someone. And in that one sentence, you hear his transformation, the shift from regret to purpose. Innovation often rises in the aftermath of conflict. Communities begin repairing what was destroyed, using creativity and resourcefulness they never knew they had. A broken water system becomes a community project. A collapsed marketplace becomes a shared rebuilding effort. Men and women gather tools, wood, metal scraps, whatever they can find, and begin constructing something new. And while the world may see this as simple rebuilding, it is something much deeper. It is the human soul refusing to remain in ruins. There is also the story of a young girl who lost her father in the war. For months, she didn't speak much. She carried his old watch everywhere she went, holding it even in her sleep. One day, a volunteer brought art supplies to the shelter: crayons, paper, a few paintbrushes. The little girl sat quietly, then began drawing. At first, just shapes, then simple landscapes. Then, one afternoon, she drew a picture of her father standing at the door, smiling. When she finished, she whispered, "This is how he looked when he came home every evening. I want to remember that part." Healing had found her too. And in these small and big ways, the human spirit proves again and again that it can bend but not break. Communities begin to rediscover joy, cautious at first, then stronger. With time, someone rebuilds a bakery. Someone else starts repairing bicycles. A group of mothers organizes a small market. Children run through rebuilt streets with kites made from scraps of paper. People celebrate small holidays again. Little rituals return: morning tea, evening walks, sharing stories. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't erase the losses. But it adds new memories beside the old ones. Memories bright enough to soften the shadows. This phase of the story shows not just survival, but renewal. It shows that the heart, even when shattered, has a stunning ability to reassemble itself, not into what it was before, but into something wiser, more compassionate, and surprisingly strong. The human spirit is unbroken because it chooses, again and again, to believe that tomorrow can still offer something worth waking up for. And when people come together, carrying their scars, their hopes, their shattered pieces, something remarkable happens. Healing becomes contagious. Pain becomes shared. Strength becomes multiplied. Community becomes the soil from which new life grows. War may shape people, but it does not define them. Loss may wound them, but it does not end them. Trauma may silence them, but it does not erase their voice. They rise, slowly, quietly, bravely. That is why this story is called The Human Spirit Unbroken, because no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how heavy the memories, there remains a force inside every survivor that refuses to surrender. A force that rebuilds homes. A force that rewrites futures. A force that believes love is still possible. A force that turns tragedy into testimony. And as these stories ripple outward, reaching strangers across oceans and borders, something beautiful happens. people begin to understand that healing is not just a personal journey, it is a universal one. The details change, the cultures differ, the languages shift, but the core remains the same. Everyone is searching for a way to be whole again. This phase ends with a simple scene: a man walking down a quiet road at sunrise. His silhouette is calm. The world behind him still carries scars, but the world ahead of him is brightening with light. He is not running, not escaping, just walking forward, one steady step at a time. And that is the heart of the story. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. Strength doesn't shout. Hope doesn't roar. They grow quietly, slowly, beautifully, in the courage of everyday people who choose to keep living. Their spirit unbroken. When a community has survived conflict, the world often assumes the story ends there with the ashes, the destruction, the sorrow. But what the world rarely sees is the quiet miracle that happens afterward. The miracle of rebuilding, not just homes or roads, but rebuilding a future shaped by hands that have known suffering, by hearts that have been tested, by spirits that refuse to stay broken. The people who walk forward out of the shadows of war carry with them a blueprint of possibility, a vision of what life could become if courage and hope continue to lead the way. The future always begins in the smallest ways. A father repairing a roof with his bare hands, smiling tiredly at his children below. A mother planting seeds in soil that hasn't been touched in years. A teacher gathering a group of children beneath a tree because the school is still being rebuilt, but the learning must go on. These moments, simple yet powerful, become the first stones in a long bridge toward a life beyond scars. There is a man in this part of the story, a quiet man, not a speaker or leader, but someone whose presence alone gives others strength. He once worked as a carpenter before the war, shaping wood with patience and precision. When the conflict ended, he returned to find the workshop he built with his father reduced to rubble. Instead of mourning what was lost, he knelt down, sifted through broken pieces, and gathered what he could. With each plank he salvaged, he carved a step toward the future. Soon, children began visiting him, watching him work. He taught them how to hold tools, how to measure, how to turn raw material into something useful. That workshop became more than a place, it became a symbol of rebirth, a reminder that where something is broken, something new can rise. That's what rebuilding after war looks like. Not grand speeches, not sweeping gestures, but everyday acts that whisper, "We are still here. We are still moving forward." In another village, women gather near the river each morning. They used to fetch water in silence, weighed down by memories. But slowly, laughter returned to their conversations. One day, they decided to create a small business together, selling handmade crafts, weaving stories into colorful fabrics. The patterns they created were not just designs. They were memories stitched with hope, a message to the world that beauty can still rise after devastation. Some footage shows their hands weaving threads, the sunlight flickering off the river, the fabric drying on a clothesline. These images remind viewers that healing is not only emotional, it is also practical. It is creating jobs, building schools, restoring marketplaces. It is the act of giving people back their purpose. Young people play a powerful role in this new chapter. They are too young to carry the full weight of war on their shoulders, but old enough to see its consequences. And instead of letting the pain define their future, they choose to be builders, innovators, dreamers. A group of teenagers forms a volunteer team, clearing debris from roads, repainting damaged walls, replanting trees that were destroyed. They document their work on an old camera someone found, capturing smiles, progress, and transformation. These images show something the world rarely sees: joy returning to places that once felt hopeless. Then there is the boy who lost his home, but not his imagination. One day he found a cracked cell phone left behind after the conflict. It barely worked, but he used it to watch videos about engineering, construction, solar power. Soon he was experimenting with wires and scraps of metal. By the time he turned 17, he built a small solar lamp that lit his entire home at night. People in the village began asking him to make lamps for them too. From destruction, he created light, literally. This is the promise of the future. Young minds shaping a world brighter than the one they inherited. In the aftermath of conflict, entire communities begin thinking long-term again. They talk about sustainable farming, safer buildings, better education. They build water systems that will last generations. They create small committees to guide their economic recovery. They plan not for next week, but for the next decade. These discussions often happen in simple places around dinner tables, under lantern light, beside half-rebuilt walls, but their impact is enormous. War may have delayed dreams, but it could not destroy them. One of the most powerful stories in this phase is of a woman who used to run a small clinic. After the war, she had nothing: no supplies, no building, no equipment. Still, she began treating people wherever she could, under trees, in abandoned houses, wherever she was needed. Word spread of her dedication. Eventually, volunteers helped her rebuild a proper clinic, brick by brick. Today, she not only heals wounds, but trains young women to become nurses. Phase by phase, life is returning. Purpose is returning. And above all, hope is returning. Even the land begins healing. Farmers clean broken fields, dig new irrigation paths, and plant crops again. Aerial footage would show green patches slowly replacing dried, barren earth. Once silent forests begin to echo with birdsong again. The natural world reflects what is happening in the human heart: regrowth, renewal, resurrection. Religious and cultural traditions also return. Festivals are celebrated again, even if smaller than before. Families gather in circles, sharing stories of loss, but also stories of perseverance. There is dancing again, singing again. There are tears, but now they are mixed with laughter. The future after conflict is built on resilience, on hands that refuse to stay idle, on hearts that refuse to stay wounded, on minds that refuse to stop dreaming. Everything becomes symbolic. The first child born after the war, the first wedding, the first harvest, the first classroom rebuilt. Each event is more than a milestone. It is a declaration that life is stronger than destruction. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this: survivors begin redefining themselves not by what they lost, but by what they can still create. The past may have scars, but the future has vision. The past may have grief, but the future has growth. The past may have echoes of pain, but the future whispers of possibility. Phase 4 ends with a quiet scene, a group of children running across a newly rebuilt playground, their laughter rising into the sky like music. Behind them, adults stand watching with soft smiles, remembering a time when they feared their children might never laugh freely again. But now they do. Because the future belongs not to the war that tried to destroy them, but to the courage that refused to surrender. There comes a moment in every story of recovery when the responsibility begins to shift, when the survivors, the communities, the people who lived through the conflict have done their part, and the rest of the world must decide how it will respond. Not with pity, not with charity, but with solidarity, respect, and understanding. This final phase begins with a simple truth: no one rebuilds alone. Every child who goes back to school does so because someone helped restore that school. Every family who rebuilds a home relies on someone offering support, tools, or a helping hand. Every survivor learning to smile again carries the strength of countless strangers who believed they deserved a second chance. Your role in this story begins here. You are not just a viewer, you are a witness. And witnesses are powerful. When you listen to these stories, truly listen, you help preserve them. You help ensure that what happened is not forgotten, but transformed into fuel for change. Some people choose to support organizations working on the ground. Others choose to raise awareness, share stories, or advocate for better support systems for veterans, refugees, and survivors. Some people volunteer their time, some offer skills, some simply spread hope by reminding others that humanity survives because kindness survives. Every action, no matter how small, becomes a thread in the fabric of renewal. Imagine a person watching this video thousands of miles away, feeling something stir inside them: compassion, responsibility, a desire to help. Maybe they donate a book to a rebuilding school. Maybe they write a letter to a soldier. Maybe they create art inspired by resilience. Those actions might seem insignificant alone, but together they create momentum. Communities recovering from trauma are not looking for saviors. They are looking for partners, for people who believe in them, for voices that say, your story matters, your future matters, and that is where you come in. There is a story of a veteran who felt forgotten after returning home. He struggled in silence for years until one day he received a letter from a stranger who simply wrote, "Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your courage. You are not alone." That single sentence changed his entire path. He reached out for help. He found support. He began rebuilding his life, all because one person took a moment to care. Never underestimate the power of caring. Your role in renewal might also be internal learning, reflecting, or becoming more empathetic. Understanding that behind every conflict are human beings, mothers, fathers, children, dreamers, people who want what all of us want: safety, dignity, peace. You may never hold a hammer on a rebuilding site. You may never travel to a place affected by war. But if you carry these stories with you, if you allow them to soften your heart, if you let them influence the way you treat the people around you, you become part of the healing process. Change begins in the heart long before it reaches the world. And for the survivors in this story, knowing that someone out there cares, someone who has never met them but still believes in them, that knowledge alone is a kind of healing. As this narrative reaches its final moments, picture this. A village once shattered now glows softly under the evening sun. Homes rebuilt, laughter returning, a market bustling with life again. Children chasing each other across dusty paths. A teacher closing her classroom door after a long day. A father tucking his daughter into bed as she whispers dreams for tomorrow. These images do not erase the scars, but they prove that scars do not stop life from blooming again. Your role is to keep this bloom alive through awareness, compassion, kindness, or action. By sharing their stories, by acknowledging their strength, by choosing empathy over silence. The final message of this journey is simple. The world becomes better, not through grand gestures, but through millions of small, powerful acts of humanity. Acts of listening, acts of helping, acts of remembering, acts of caring. And every time you choose kindness, every time you choose to lift someone else, every time you choose empathy over judgment, you participate in rebuilding a world that conflict tried to break. War tests the human spirit, hope restores it, and you help sustain it. As the story closes, imagine one final scene. A survivor standing at the edge of a field at sunrise. The sky glows gold. The wind carries the smell of earth. Birds begin singing. The world feels new again. The survivor closes their eyes, breathes deeply, and takes a step forward, not alone, but supported by countless unseen hearts across the world. You are one of those hearts. And because of you, renewal continues.